Have you ever wondered how many lives pass by unseen right before our very eyes? In the alley behind an upscale restaurant, a 6-year-old girl begs for scraps and is thrown out like trash. But when a stranger witnesses the scene, something inside him shatters irreversibly. And from that moment on, a single child begins to change hearts, rules, and futures. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Now, continuing. A heavy night was falling over New York City, bringing with it that mix of lights that make the city seem both alive and indifferent at the same time. The wide avenues filled with hurried cars, with people returning from work, with shop windows that glittered, trying to seduce the tired eyes of passers-by. In the heart of the Upper East Side, where elegant buildings rose like guardians of a world few could reach, the restaurant The Tuscan Villa was in full swing. It was one of those places where waiters wore bow ties and where every dish left the kitchen as if it were a work of art, destined only for the most discerning palates. But behind the impeccable facade at the back of the establishment, where elegance gave way to cold concrete and exposed pipes, there was an alley. It was there that the garbage bags accumulated every night, awaiting the early morning collection. It was also there that another reality, very different from that of the illuminated dining rooms, insisted on existing. Among the remnants of luxury, small shadows sometimes moved. Cats, rats, and occasionally people. People the city preferred not to see, whom the system pushed to the margins, who lived off the scraps that others discarded without a second thought. On that Thursday night, as the restaurant's rush began to die down and the last customers savored their desserts, one of those shadows stirred among the garbage bags. It was too small to be an adult. Too small even to be a 10-year-old child. The girl was at most 5 years old, maybe 6, but hunger and time on the streets had made her someone who seemed to carry the weight of much more. Her dress, which might have once been pink, was now just an indistinct stain of dirt and tears. Her bare feet were covered in small sores, the kind that appear when you walk too much on hot sidewalks and rough asphalt. Her tangled hair fell over her thin shoulders, and her hollow eyes, the kind that have seen things no child should ever see, searched for something in the middle of that mountain of trash. She knew it wasn't the best time, she knew it was risky, but the hunger was greater than the fear. For 2 days she had eaten nothing but a piece of stale bread she had found discarded near a bakery. Her stomach ached, complained, begged for anything that could calm that feeling of emptiness that seemed to have no end. That's why she was there, crouched between the bags, waiting for the right moment. Waiting for someone to come out the service door, waiting for a chance. The metal door creaked open, and the yellowish light from the kitchen flooded the alley for a few seconds. The girl shrank back even more, almost merging with the wall. A young woman in a black uniform and white apron appeared holding a heavy garbage bag. It was Julia, one of the newest waitresses at the Tuscan Villa. She had only been working there for 3 months, still getting used to the routine, the pressure, the demands of the manager, Marshall, who tolerated no mistakes. Julia threw the bag on the ground with a tired sigh, wiped her hands on her apron, and was about to go back inside when she heard a noise, a movement. She turned, startled, and that's when she saw it. The girl was standing now shy, her trembling little hands clasped in front of her body, as if trying to protect herself from something invisible. Her large eyes stared at Julia with a mixture of fear and hope, that fragile hope of someone who has been disappointed so many times they barely dare to believe this time could be different. Her half-open mouth tried to form words, but what came out was just a hoarse, almost inaudible whisper. "Please, ma'am, do you have any leftover food? Anything will do. I won't be a bother, I promise." Julia felt her heart clench in her chest. It wasn't the first time she had seen someone begging for food there, but it had never been a child, never someone so small, so fragile, so visibly abandoned by the world. She hesitated, looked back into the kitchen, calculated the possibilities. She knew that Marshall, the manager, didn't like anyone giving anything to those who showed up out back. He said it attracted more people, that it was dangerous, that it created problems. But how could she ignore those eyes? How could she pretend she wasn't seeing a hungry child? Before Julia could answer, before she could make any decision, Marshall's deep, irritated voice exploded behind her. What's going on out here? Why are you just standing around, Julia? We have tables to clear. Marshall appeared at the door, his face red from hours in the hot kitchen, dealing with orders, complaints, and tight deadlines. He was a middle-aged man with a prominent belly, pushing against the buttons of his white shirt, and small eyes that always seemed to be looking for reasons to complain. When he saw the girl, his face twisted into an expression of disgust and impatience. What is this? These people coming around, begging for things again? Haven't I told you I don't want this at the back of my restaurant? Marshall, she's just a child, Julia began, but was cut off mid-sentence. Kid or not, this isn't a shelter. If she wants to eat, let her work. Let her pay like everyone else. Do they think food falls from the sky? Do they think I'm a bank just handing out what's mine? Get out of here, girl. Go on. Get out of my sight. The girl recoiled as if she had been physically struck. Her eyes filled with tears that she tried to hold back, biting her lower lip hard. Julia took a step forward, trying to smooth over the situation, but Marshall was faster. He pointed a finger at the girl and continued, his voice even louder now, as if he wanted to make her understand, as if it were her fault she was in that situation. Don't come back here, do you hear me? I don't want to see you hanging around my restaurant, understand? Beggar, freeloader, go bother someone else. The words fell on the girl like stones. She swallowed her sob, took another step back, tripped on a garbage bag, and nearly fell. Regaining her balance, she looked one last time at Julia, as if seeking some comfort from her, some word that would undo what she had just heard. But the waitress stood paralyzed, embarrassed, without the courage to challenge her boss in front of him. When Marshall made a move to advance, the girl turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the alley like a ghost that had never been there. Marshall went back into the restaurant, muttering something about how people had no shame, about how the world was full of freeloaders. Julia stood there for a few more seconds with a heavy heart, feeling that something inside her had broken. She knew she should have done something. She knew she should have stood up to Marshall, gotten a plate of food, or at least offered a kind word. But the fear of losing her job, the need to support her own family, all of it paralyzed her. With a sad sigh, she went back inside, closed the metal door, and tried, unsuccessfully, to forget those hollow, hungry eyes. What none of them knew, what Marshall could never have imagined in that moment of arrogance and coldness, was that someone was watching everything. At one of the back windows of the restaurant, far from the main dining room, a man was sitting alone at a small, discreet table. His name was Robert Mendez, and although he was dressed simply in a light blue dress shirt without a tie and tailored trousers with no apparent luxury, he was the owner of the largest restaurant chain in New York City. The Tuscan Villa was just one of the 15 establishments that bore his brand. But Robert made a point of visiting each of them regularly, always, discreetly, without fanfare, without announcing his arrival in advance. He wanted to see how things really worked when no one knew the owner was around. That night, Robert had dined alone, as he often did since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier. The large house in Greenwich Village, with its 5 bedrooms and spacious garden, was always empty. The children he never had never filled those rooms with laughter and mess. The life he had built, full of professional achievements and recognition, had always seemed sufficient while she was by his side. But after cancer took her, after he was left alone in that silent mansion, Robert began to feel an emptiness that no business success could fill. He was finishing his coffee when he heard the voices outside. The window was slightly ajar, and although he couldn't see clearly, he could hear every word Marshall shouted. He rose slowly, approached the window, and that's when he saw the full scene. The small, dirty, hungry girl being humiliated by an adult man as if she were less than nothing, as if she were trash, just like the bags that surrounded her. Robert felt something churn inside him, a dull anger, a deep indignation, but also a pain he didn't expect to feel, because in that child's frightened eyes, he saw everything that was wrong with the world. He saw cruelty disguised as pragmatism. He saw indifference dressed up as common sense. He saw a society that discarded people like it discarded empty packaging. Robert didn't intervene immediately, not because he didn't want to, but because something inside him told him he needed to understand more. He needed to know where that girl came from, where she was going, how she had ended up there. He paid his bill discreetly, left a generous tip for Julia without asking any questions, and left the restaurant through the front door. He walked to the corner, turned into the back alley, and waited. Minutes later, he saw the small figure emerging from the shadows, walking slowly down the street, shoulders slumped, steps dragging. He began to follow her. He kept a safe distance, always on the other side of the sidewalk, always careful not to frighten her. The girl walked down Broadway, passing crowded bars, shops still open, groups of young people laughing loudly. No one seemed to notice her presence. It was as if she were invisible, a shadow gliding between people without anyone bothering to look down. Robert watched everything with an almost painful attention. He saw how she steered clear of larger groups, how she lowered her head when passing near store security guards, how she seemed to have learned to make herself small so as not to be a bother. They walked for nearly half an hour. The urban landscape gradually changed. The elegant shop windows gave way to simpler businesses. The tall glass-fronted buildings yielded to old peeling constructions with facades that hadn't seen a renovation in a long time. The hustle and bustle diminished, and the streets grew darker with fewer functioning streetlights. Robert felt his heart tighten with every block he walked. Where was this child going? Where did she sleep? Was anyone waiting for her? The girl crossed a wide avenue, past a closed gas station, and entered a small park. It was one of those places that had once been planned as a neighborhood meeting point, but that time and neglect had turned into just a patch of worn grass, surrounded by cracked wooden benches. There were still some children playing there, supervised by adults chatting in groups. There was also an elderly couple sitting on a bench sharing a snack, and a man selling popsicles from a colorful cart. The girl stopped at the edge of the park and watched. She seemed both fascinated and sad, as if she was seeing something she could never have. The other children ran, shouted, laughed. They had clean clothes, shoes on their feet, adults who looked after them. They had what she did not. After a few minutes of standing there, she walked to an empty bench, the one farthest from the others, and sat down. She hugged her knees to her chest, rested her chin on them, and remained like that, quiet, looking up at the sky that was beginning to darken completely. Robert, hidden behind a tree on the other side of the park, watched without quite understanding what was happening, and that's when he saw something that broke him in two. The girl began to sing, softly, almost in a whisper, but he could hear it because the park was emptying and the silence of the night was beginning to take hold. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear." She sang to herself. She sang alone. No cake, no candle, no one to clap or shout. She sang to herself as if trying to believe that she existed, that she mattered, that she deserved at least that minimal ritual that every child knows. When she finished, she closed her eyes tightly, clashed her hands as if in prayer, and made a silent wish. Robert couldn't hear what she was wishing for, but he could imagine. He could feel it in the air, in the way her lips moved, in the expression of pure desire etched on that dirty face. When she opened her eyes, the girl stood up slowly, looked around one last time, and continued walking. She left the park, crossed a narrow street, and entered a corridor between two old buildings. Robert followed her, more carefully now, because the area was becoming increasingly isolated. They passed vacant lots, graffiti-covered walls, abandoned buildings. The noise of the city faded behind them, replaced by a heavy silence, broken only by the distant sound of cars on the avenue. The girl reached an overpass. Underneath it there was a wooden fence with several planks missing. She ducked, slipped, through a hole, and disappeared on the other side. Robert waited a few seconds, took a deep breath, and did the same. On the other side of the fence was an abandoned lot. It was clearly what remained of a construction project that had never been completed. There were scattered bricks, hardened bags of cement, twisted iron bars, pieces of broken concrete. And in the farthest corner, sheltered by the shadow of the overpass, was a small, makeshift shelter. It was made of cardboard. Large appliance boxes, probably salvaged from some trash pile, formed the walls. On top, torn plastic. Tarps tried to protect from the rain, held down by rocks and pieces of wood. Inside you could see a few old, dirty, torn blankets. There was a small faded backpack, and next to it, a plastic bottle with a little water. On the ground, a bruised piece of fruit, maybe a banana or an apple, was kept as if it were a treasure. The girl entered the shelter, sat on one of the blankets, and carefully picked up the fruit. She ate slowly, chewing each piece as if she wanted to make it last as long as possible. She took a sip of water, capped the bottle again, and put it in her backpack. Then she lay down on the cardboard, pulled one of the blankets over her body, and began to sing again. This time, it wasn't "Happy Birthday." It was a lullaby, one of those that mothers sing to their children to help them sleep, except she was singing it to herself, her voice choked with emotion, trying to calm her own fear of the approaching night. Robert was hidden behind a concrete block, just a few feet away. He watched the scene with teary eyes, feeling a mixture of anger, sadness, and helplessness. How was a child this small sleeping alone in an abandoned lot? Where were the adults responsible for her? Where was the state, the institutions, the people who were supposed to protect those who couldn't protect themselves? And more importantly, how had he, Robert Mendez, with all the money he had, with all the influence he possessed, never stopped to think that scenes like this happened every day, right under his nose, in the city he thought he knew so well? He stayed there for over an hour, waiting for the girl to fall asleep. When he finally heard her breathing become deeper and more regular, when he was sure she was asleep, Robert left in silence. He walked back to the street, hailed a cab, and went straight home. But upon arriving at the empty mansion in Greenwich Village, he couldn't sleep. He sat in the enormous living room with the lights off, thinking about that girl singing Happy Birthday alone, thinking about her being humiliated in the alley, thinking about her sleeping on cardboard while he had 5 empty bedrooms, thinking about how his life, so full of material achievements, seemed so devoid of meaning when compared to the silent desperation of that child. When the sun began to rise, Robert had already made a decision. He didn't know exactly how he would do it yet. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He was not going to just pretend he hadn't seen. He was not going to go back to his usual routine and leave that girl behind, as if she were just another statistic, another number in the research on child poverty. He was going to do something. He had to. He took a shower, put on clean clothes, and before even going to the office, he stopped at a bakery and bought bags full of fresh bread, fruit, juice, yogurt. He also asked them to make a small, simple cake with chocolate frosting. Nothing too elaborate, but pretty, the kind a child would find special. When everything was ready, Robert returned to the abandoned lot. It was still early. The sun had barely risen completely, and the city was still waking up. He carefully slipped through the hole in the fence, holding the bags, and walked slowly to the cardboard shelter. The girl was still asleep, curled up in the old blanket. Robert stood there for a few seconds, unsure of how to act. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want her to think he was another dangerous adult, another threat. So he decided to wait. He sat down a few feet away, leaned against a concrete pillar, and stayed there, quietly, waiting for her to wake up naturally. Half an hour later, the girl stirred. She stretched, opened her eyes slowly, and that's when she saw him. A man sitting nearby looking at her, her whole body tensed. She jumped up, backing away until she was pressed against the cardboard wall, her eyes wide with fear. Robert noticed her panic and raised his hands in a peaceful gesture. "It's okay. I'm not here to hurt you. You don't have to be afraid of me." The girl didn't answer. She just stared, calculating whether she should run, scream, or do something else, but her legs seemed glued to the floor. Robert continued speaking, his voice soft, trying to convey safety. "I saw you last night. I saw what happened at the restaurant. I saw how you were treated, and it broke my heart. So I followed you, not to harm you, but because I wanted to understand where you live, how you live. I know it might seem strange. I know you don't know me, but I brought something for you." Robert took one of the bags and placed it on the ground, halfway between them. Then he backed away again, giving her space to approach if she wanted to. The girl looked at the bag, then at him, then back at the bag. Suspicion warred with curiosity and hunger. Robert continued, "There's bread, fruit, juice. And there's a cake too, a real cake. You don't have to take it if you don't want to, it's your decision. But if you do, know that I don't want anything in return. I just wanted you to have something to eat today." The girl remained motionless for almost a full minute. Then slowly she took a step forward, then another and another. When she got close to the bag, she quickly crouched down, pulled it towards her, and opened it. Her eyes widened when she saw what was inside. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. The colorful fruit seemed to glow in the sunlight, and there at the bottom, carefully wrapped, was the cake. Small, simple, but perfect. She picked up the cake with both hands, as if holding something that could break at any moment. She looked at Robert with an expression he would never forget. It was gratitude mixed with disbelief. It was relief mixed with the fear that this was a dream. It was the expression of someone who hadn't felt they mattered to anyone for a very long time. "Is it real?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Is it really for me?" Robert felt a lump in his throat. He nodded, unable to speak for a few seconds. When he finally found his voice, he replied, "It's yours. Happy belated birthday." The girl hugged the cake to her chest and, for the first time in a very, very long time, allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, not from fear, but from a relief so profound it couldn't be contained in her small chest. And Robert, the man who had everything and yet nothing, knew in that exact moment that his life had just changed forever. Robert returned home, his heart still racing after that encounter. He sat in his spacious office, with its shelves full of books he rarely opened, and paintings of landscapes he no longer saw, and thought for hours. The image of the girl hugging that simple cake as if it were the greatest treasure in the world wouldn't leave his mind. He knew that giving her food once didn't solve anything. It was just a gesture, too small in the face of the problem's vastness. But at the same time it was a start, and Robert Mendes was not a man who did things by halves. He picked up the phone and called August, his right-hand man at the company. August had worked with him for over 15 years. He was a lawyer by training, but served as the director of operations for the restaurant chain. He was a trustworthy, discreet, and efficient man, someone Robert knew he could count on in any situation. When August answered, Robert got straight to the point. "August, I need you to do an investigation for me. I need total discretion. I don't want any fuss. I don't want anyone else to know besides you." August, accustomed to his boss's unusual requests, didn't seem surprised. "Go ahead, Robert, what do you need?" Robert took a deep breath and began to tell him everything. He told him about the girl in the alley, about the humiliation, about how he had followed her to the abandoned lot. He told him about the cardboard shelter, about her singing happy birthday alone in the park. And he told him about the urgency he felt to do something, to understand who this child was, where she came from, if she had a family, if anyone was looking for her. On the other end of the line, August was silent for a few seconds. Then he said, his voice filled with a seriousness Robert knew well, "I understand, Robert. I'll start today. But you know this could uncover some difficult things, right? A child alone on the street usually has a heavy story behind her." "I know," Robert replied. "That's exactly why I need to know. I can't help without understanding the whole situation." August promised he would have information in a few days, and he kept his word. 3 days later, he called Robert and asked to meet at a discreet cafe far from the office. When they sat down, August opened a folder and began to speak, while Robert felt his stomach churn with each new piece of information. "The girl's name is Helen Smith. She's 6 years old. Her mother died in childbirth from complications that could have been prevented if she'd had access to proper medical care. The father, a man named Walter, was involved in some shady dealings. Petty crimes, nothing too serious, but enough that he didn't want to raise the daughter. He left her with an aunt, the mother's sister, who accepted custody in exchange for receiving a government benefit." Robert clenched his fists. "And this aunt? Where is she?" August sighed. "The aunt was using Helen, Robert. The child was forced to beg for money on the street, to rummage through trash, to always come home with something. If she came back empty-handed, she was beaten. The neighbors knew, some even tried to report it, but the system is slow, overwhelmed. Before anything was done, Helen ran away." "Ran away?" Robert's eyes widened. At 6 years old? At 5, at the time. August shuffled some papers. She ran away because the aunt started allowing an acquaintance of hers, a man who frequented the house, to do inappropriate things to the girl. Helen didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was wrong, that it hurt, that it made her feel dirty. One night, when the aunt went out and left her locked inside alone, Helen managed to get out through a window and never went back. Robert felt tears burn in his eyes. He had to turn his head, look out the cafe window, take a deep breath to keep from breaking down right there. How had a 5-year-old child gone through that? How did the world allow such things to happen? There's more, August continued, his voice heavy. The aunt's acquaintance, the man who was abusing Helen, found out she ran away and has been looking for her, not because he cares about her, but because he's afraid she'll tell someone what he did. He has a police record, has been arrested for assault before. If Helen is found and starts talking, he could go to prison again. Robert looked back at August, his eyes now hard, determined. Then we have to protect her now, today. August nodded. I've already contacted a lawyer who specializes in child and adolescent law. He's preparing a protective order. We'll need to involve the courts, Child Protective Services. Do this the right way. We can't just take the girl off the street without legal backing, or you could face serious problems. Do whatever it takes, Robert said. I want her to have all the protection possible. I want that man to stay away from her, and I want Helen to have a chance at a decent life. In the following days, Robert visited Helen at the abandoned lot every morning. He brought food, clothes, clean blankets. He talked to her, slowly, gradually earning her trust. Helen was wary, like any child who has learned the hard way that adults can hurt. But there was something in Robert's calm demeanor, in the way he respected her space, that slowly began to melt her barriers. One morning, Robert brought a woman named Sylvia with him. She was a social worker, hired by him to help with the process. Sylvia had years of experience working with vulnerable children. She knew how to approach, how to talk, how not to frighten. When Helen saw her, she tensed up, but Robert explained that Sylvia was a friend, that she was there to help too. Sylvia sat on the ground at Helen's level and began to talk. She didn't ask invasive questions, didn't pressure her. She just told stories, spoke of other children she had helped, explained that there were safe places, people who cared. Helen listened in silence, her eyes attentive, processing every word. It was Sylvia who, after several conversations over the course of a week, managed to get Helen to tell her story. Little by little, in a low voice with long pauses, the girl revealed the pieces of her life. She spoke of the mother she never knew, of the father who wanted nothing to do with her, of the aunt who used her, of the man who hurt her, and of how she ran away, scared, with nowhere to go, and ended up on the streets, sleeping where she could, eating what she found. Robert listened to it all with a broken heart. Every detail was a stab wound. But he knew he had to listen, had to understand, to be able to truly help. When Helen finished speaking, she was crying, and it was Robert who approached, slowly, and asked if he could hug her. She hesitated, but then nodded, and when he wrapped his arms around her, she clung to him, like someone clinging to a raft in the middle of the sea. In the days that followed, the lawyer worked quickly. He obtained the protective order that prevented the man from approaching Helen. He initiated the process with Child Protective Services to regularize the girl's situation. And Robert, while waiting for all the legalities to be resolved, made a decision. He had a small empty apartment in a quiet neighborhood in Queens. It was a property he had bought years ago as an investment and had never rented out. He decided to renovate it quickly, to turn it into a home for Helen. He hired a cleaning crew, bought simple but comfortable furniture, filled the refrigerator with healthy food, bought clothes, toys, school supplies. He wanted that when Helen walked in, she would feel it was her place, not a temporary charity. He wanted it to be a home. It took almost 2 weeks for everything to be ready, both the apartment and the legal side of things. When the day finally came to take Helen, there Robert was more nervous than he had ever been in any business meeting. He went to the abandoned lot early in the morning, accompanied by Sylvia. Helen was awake, sitting on the cardboard floor, eating an apple he had brought the day before. "Helen," Robert began, crouching in front of her. "Remember I said I wanted to help you, that I wanted you to have a safe place to live?" The girl nodded, suspicious. "Well, I've arranged an apartment for you. It's small, but it's clean, safe, has food, a real bed. It has everything you need, and there's more. I got you legal protection. That man who hurt you can't come near you anymore. If he tries, he'll be arrested." Helen looked at him with wide eyes. "Is that true?" "It's true." Robert smiled, but it was a smile heavy with emotion. "Now, I'm not going to force you to do anything. You can stay here if you want, but if you agree to come with me, I promise I will take care of you. Not alone, Sylvia will always be around. There's a psychologist who will help you deal with everything you've been through, and there are lawyers making sure you stay safe. But the decision is yours." Helen was silent for a long time. She looked around at the cardboard shelter that had been her home for so long. She looked at the dirty lot, at the overpass above, at the harsh reality she knew so well. Then she looked at Robert, at Sylvia, at the possibilities they represented. And with a trembling but firm voice she said, "I'll go. But if anything goes wrong, if anyone tries to hurt me again, I'm coming back to the street. I know how to survive on my own." Robert felt a pang in his chest at that sentence. A 6-year-old child shouldn't know how to survive on her own, but he nodded, respecting her autonomy. "All right. If you want to come back at any time, I won't stop you, but I will do everything I can to make sure you never have to." They helped Helen gather her few belongings, the old backpack, the least torn blanket, a rag doll she had found in a dumpster weeks before and kept as a treasure. Then they left the lot, slipped through the hole in the fence and got into Robert's car. Helen had never been in a car before. She clung to the seat, looking out the window with a mixture of fascination and fear as the city sped by outside. When they arrived at the building where the apartment was, Helen looked up at the many floors and asked, "Am I really going to live here?" Robert laughed, a soft, tender laugh. "Right here, on the 4th floor. Come on, I'll show you." They went up in the elevator, another frightening novelty for Helen. When Robert opened the apartment door and turned on the lights, Helen took a few timid steps inside and stopped, frozen. There was a living room with a comfortable sofa, a small television, clean curtains on the windows. There was a kitchen with a small table and 2 chairs, and there was a bedroom. A room just for her, with a real bed, covered in white sheets and a pink comforter. It had a closet with new clothes, a fluffy rug on the floor, shelves with some children's books and toys. "Is all this mine?" Helen asked, her voice almost inaudible. "All yours," Robert replied. Helen walked slowly to the bed, ran her hand over the comforter, testing if it was real. Then she sat on the edge and looked around, as if trying to memorize every detail before it all disappeared. Sylvia entered the room, sat next to her, and said in a gentle voice, "You're not dreaming, Helen. This is real, and it's yours. You can make yourself at home, you can play, you can make noise, you can be a child." Helen turned to her, her eyes full of tears. "And if I break something by accident? Will they hit me?" Sylvia's heart ached. "No, my love, no one will hit. No one will. You. If you break something, we'll fix it. But no one will ever hurt you for it. Never again." In the following days, Helen gradually adapted to this new reality. Everything was strange. The mattress was too soft. She had spent so long sleeping on hard surfaces that it took her a while to get used to it. The hot water from the shower scared her. She had never taken a hot shower in her life. The refrigerator full of food seemed like a miracle that could end at any moment, so she ate slowly, afraid it would be the last time. Robert visited every day. He brought small gifts, books, sweets, but mostly he brought his time. He would sit with her, listen to her stories, answer her questions. Helen wanted to know everything about him. Why was he doing this? Why did he care? Did he have children? Robert answered honestly. He told her he had no children, that his wife had passed away, that he lived alone in a house that was too big, and that when he saw her in that alley, being humiliated, something inside him changed. He realized he had spent his whole life building an empire but hadn't built a family. He had no one to love, no one to care for, no one who truly needed him. Helen listened attentively. And one of those days, as they were sitting on the living room sofa watching cartoons, she asked, "Are you going to be like my dad?" Robert felt his throat tighten. "I want to be someone you can trust, someone who will always be here when you need me. I don't know if I'm a father, I've never been one, but I can try to be, if you'll let me." Helen was thoughtful for a moment. Then she said with the devastating simplicity of children, "Then you're my Robert, and I'm your Helen, that's good." Robert smiled, his eyes misty. "That's good." Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. The psychologist Sylvia recommended began seeing Helen twice a week. The sessions were difficult. Helen had a lot to process, many wounds to heal. But little by little, with patience and care, she began to understand that what happened to her was not her fault, that she was not dirty, that she did not deserve to be hurt. She began to understand that she was safe now. Child Protective Services monitored the situation closely, making regular visits, ensuring everything was being done correctly. Robert didn't want shortcuts. He didn't want to use his influence to speed up processes improperly. He wanted to do everything right, even if it took longer, because he wasn't doing this on a whim. He was doing it to give Helen a real chance at a future, and while he was taking care of Helen, Robert also didn't forget where it all began. The restaurant, Marshall, the humiliation. He returned to the Tuscan villa a few times, always discreetly, always observing. He saw how Marshall treated the staff, how he spoke to customers, how he managed the place. And the more he saw, the more convinced he became that this man did not represent the values he wanted for his company. If you were in Robert's place, would you have confronted Marshall immediately, or would you have waited to better understand the situation? Tell us in the comments. One Friday night, when the restaurant was packed, Robert entered, dressed more formally. This time he didn't want to go unnoticed. He wanted to be seen. He sat at a table in the center of the dining room and asked for the menu. Marshall, busy in the kitchen, didn't notice who the customer was. It was only when Robert asked to speak to the manager that Marshall came out, wiping his hands on his apron, ready to handle another complaint or compliment. When he saw who was sitting at the table, Marshall turned pale. "Mr. Mendez, I didn't know you were here. If you had let me know, I would have prepared everything specially." Robert looked at him with a neutral expression. "Sit down, Marshall, I need to talk to you." Marshall sat down, nervous, adjusting his tie, trying to smile. "What can I do for you, sir?" Robert didn't waste time. "A few weeks ago I was dining here alone, at a discreet table near the back, and I saw something that bothered me greatly." Marshall frowned, trying to remember. "What was that, sir?" "I saw you humiliate a child, a 6-year-old girl who asked for leftover food. I saw you call her a beggar, a freeloader. I saw you treat her like trash." Marshall's face turned red. "Oh, that. Mr. Mendez, you have to understand. These people show up. Here all the time, if we pay them any attention, it becomes a mess, it attracts more people, creates security problems." Robert raised his hand, cutting him off. "I don't want to hear excuses. I want you to understand something very simple. This company is not about food, it's about people, and if you can't treat a hungry child with dignity, then you are not fit to work here." Marshall tried to speak, but Robert continued, his voice louder now, causing some nearby tables to start paying attention. "That girl you humiliated was sleeping in an abandoned lot. She had run away from home because she was being abused. She was alone in the world, and when she found the courage to ask for help, you shooed her away as if she were an animal." The restaurant grew quieter. People were looking, curious. Marshall was red with a mixture of shame and anger. "Mr. Mendez, please, you don't have to do this in front of everyone." "Yes, I do," Robert replied, standing up, "because everyone here needs to know what kind of person is running this kitchen. They need to know that this company does not tolerate cruelty, does not tolerate a lack of empathy, does not tolerate anyone being treated as less than human." Robert took out his phone, opened some photos, and showed them to Marshall. They were images from the back security camera, showing Helen being chased away, showing Marshall yelling at her, and there were also photos of other similar moments, an elderly man being treated with contempt, a woman asking for scraps being sent away rudely. You have two options, Marshall. Acknowledge that you were wrong, apologize publicly, and agree to participate in training on human dignity and social responsibility, or be fired right now, in front of everyone, and have these images released showing the kind of person you are. Marshall looked around. He saw the judgmental stares of the customers. He saw the relieved expressions of some employees who had always been bothered by his manner. He saw that he had no way out. In a trembling voice, he said, I was wrong. I apologize. But Robert shook his head. It's not me you need to apologize to. It's that little girl you humiliated. And since she's not here, you'll have to live with that on your conscience. As for working here, that's over. You're fired with cause. The silence in the restaurant was absolute. Marshall stood up, red, humiliated, and walked out without looking back. Robert then turned to Julia, the waitress who had witnessed everything that night. He called her to the table. Julia, do you remember that night? She nodded, her eyes full of tears. Yes, I do, sir. I wanted to help, but I was afraid of losing my job. Robert smiled gently. You did nothing wrong. But now I want to give you an opportunity. Starting today, you are the new manager of this restaurant, and your first mission is to implement a new policy. All leftover food that is still fit for consumption will be donated to institutions, shelters, and people living on the streets, with respect, organization, and dignity. Are you up for it? Julia could hardly believe it. Yes, sir, with all my heart. And so it was, on that night, that Helen's story began to transform not just one life, but an entire culture within Robert Mendez's company. What started with a girl begging for scraps from the trash was becoming something much bigger. The months passed and Helen's life began to take on colors she never imagined existed. Waking up on a soft mattress stopped being strange and became normal. Having breakfast with warm bread, milk, and fruit stopped feeling like a dream and became routine. But more important than all of that was waking up knowing that Robert would be there, that Sylvia would stop by to talk, that there were people who cared if she slept well, if she was hungry, if she needed anything. Enrolling in school was a special moment. Robert took her personally, holding her hand as they walked through the colorful hallways filled with children's drawings, tacked to the walls. Helen looked at everything with wide eyes, fascinated and at the same time scared. She had never been inside a school before. She couldn't read, couldn't write, could barely hold a pencil properly. But the principal, a woman named Mrs. Beatrice with grey hair and a welcoming smile, knelt in front of her and said in a gentle voice, "Welcome, Helen. You're going to learn many things here. You'll make friends, you'll play. You'll discover that you're capable of much more than you imagine." On the first day of school, Helen clung to Robert's leg tightly, not wanting him to leave. Robert crouched down, looked into her eyes, and said in a firm but gentle voice, "I'll be back. At the end of the day, I'll be right here waiting for you. I promise. And I always keep my promises." Helen hesitated, but eventually let go of his leg. She entered the classroom holding hands with the teacher, a young woman named Caroline, who led her to a desk near the window. The other children looked curiously at the new girl, with her brand-new uniform and frightened expression. But gradually, with Caroline's patience and the natural way children make friends, Helen began to open up. During recess, a girl named Isabella offered her half of her snack. Helen looked at the piece of cake as if it were gold and asked shyly, "Are you sure? Won't you have enough?" Isabella laughed. "My mum always packs too much. Go ahead." And it was there, sharing a piece of cake in the schoolyard, that Helen made her first friend. When Robert returned at the end of the day, as promised, he found Helen waiting at the gate with a smile on her face. A real smile, the kind that lights up everything around it. She ran to him and jumped into his arms, telling him breathlessly about everything she had learned, about Isabella, about how nice her teacher Caroline was, about the drawings they made. Robert listened to her intently, feeling his chest tighten with emotion. This was the child he had seen singing Happy Birthday alone in a park. This was the child who slept on cardboard. And now here she was, full of life, full of stories to tell. full of a future. He understood in that moment that he wasn't just giving Helen a new life. She was giving him a new life too. At home, the evenings gained a ritual. After dinner, Helen would choose a book and ask Robert to read. At first, they were simple stories with lots of pictures and few words. But gradually, as Helen began to recognize the letters, she started to read a few sentences herself. Robert had infinite patience. When she got stuck on a difficult word, he would wait, give her hints, and celebrate when she got it right. And at the end of every story before going to sleep, Helen always asked the same question: "Will you be here tomorrow morning?" And Robert always answered, I will always be here." Sylvia continued to follow up closely. She made regular visits, talked to Helen about how she was feeling, about school, about the nightmares that still sometimes appeared. Because despite all the structure, all the affection, the traumas didn't disappear overnight. Helen still woke up in the middle of the night sometimes, sweating, afraid that it was all a dream, and that when she opened her eyes she would be back in the abandoned lot. In those moments, Robert was always attentive. He would hear her stirring in her room, go to her, sit on the edge of the bed, and stay there until she fell back asleep. The psychologist, Dr. Marcia, also did essential work. In their sessions, Helen slowly learned to name her feelings, to understand that anger, sadness, and fear were normal after everything she had been through. She learned that she didn't have to be strong all the time, that she could cry, she could ask for help, she could just be a child. And slowly, very slowly, the internal wounds began to heal. Robert, for his part, was also changing. The man who once lived for his work, who spent 12-14 hours a day immersed in spreadsheets, meetings, and business strategies, now had other commitments. He had to be home for dinner. He had to help with homework. He had to go to parent-teacher conferences at school, and he discovered that he liked it all. He liked having someone waiting for him. He liked having responsibilities that were not financial, but emotional. He liked being important to someone in a way that no amount of money could buy. August, his right-hand man, noticed the transformation. In a meeting, he commented with a smile, "You're different, Robert. Lighter, I'd say." Robert smiled back. "It's true. I spent years building an empire, but only now am I understanding what it means to have something that truly matters." Meanwhile, at the Tuscan villa, the changes implemented by Julia were yielding surprising results. The food donation policy not only helped many people, but also improved the restaurant's image. Customers praised the initiative, local media ran stories, and other establishments in the chain began to adopt the same practice. Julia proved to be a natural leader, someone who treated her team with respect, but also with firmness, someone who understood that a restaurant is not just about food, but about people. Robert would visit the Tuscan villa from time to see how things were going. On one of these visits, Julia called him over to show him something. At the back of the restaurant, where there used to be only garbage bags and contempt, there was now a small, organized area. Every day, at the end of the shift, the leftover food in perfect condition was separated into clean labeled containers. A representative from a local shelter would come to pick it up. And when someone showed up asking for food, as happened from time to time, the staff would offer a meal with respect, sometimes even inviting the person to sit and eat right there, with dignity. "Look at this, Robert," Julia said with pride. "Yesterday an elderly woman came here asking for food. I offered her a full meal with rice, beans, meat and salad. Do you know what she said? That she hadn't eaten a decent meal in years, that she always had to eat cold leftovers, spoiled food. And that for the first time someone had treated her like a person, not a nuisance." Robert felt his eyes well up. "That's it, Julia. That's exactly what I wanted when I started all this. Dignity, respect, recognizing that before anything else, we are dealing with people." The story of Helen and Robert began to spread. Not because he wanted publicity. On the contrary, Robert was always private about his personal life. But in a big city like New York, good stories have a way of getting out. Someone from the school mentioned it to someone who knew a journalist. Someone from the restaurant told a customer who told another. And suddenly a small article appeared in a local newspaper. It didn't have full names, no photos, but it told the story of a businessman who took in a homeless child and transformed not only her life, but the entire culture of his company. The reaction was unexpected. People started sending messages to the company headquarters, praising the initiative, asking how they could help, offering donations to institutions that cared for children. Robert was unsure how to handle it all. He hadn't done anything for recognition. He had done it because it was the right thing to do. But August convinced him that this attention could be used for good. That's how the Helen Project was born. It wasn't a charity in the traditional sense. It was an initiative that connected business owners willing to help with vulnerable children and adolescents. It wasn't just about giving money, but about getting involved, mentoring, creating bonds. Robert didn't want it to become cold and bureaucratic. He wanted every child served by the project to have someone who genuinely cared, just as he cared for Helen. The first project meeting took place in a company conference room with about 20 interested people. Robert was nervous. He wasn't used to talking about feelings, about emotions, but when he started telling Helen's story, when he spoke about that night in the alley, about the lonely birthday in the park, about her first days in the apartment, his voice gained firmness. He spoke about how that experience had changed his life, about how he had discovered that success without purpose is empty. By the end of the meeting, several people had committed to participating. There were lawyers offering pro bono services to sort out documentation, psychologists willing to provide free counseling, business owners wanting to fund apartments, school supplies, vocational courses, and there were also ordinary people, people without great resources but with time and a willingness to get involved, to be a presence in the life of someone who needed it. Helen, who was 8 years old by this time, attended one of the project's events. Robert thought it was important for her to know the impact her story was having. On a Saturday morning, he took her to a community center where several children served by the project were gathered. There were children of all ages, from different situations, but all sharing something in common, the experience of having been invisible and now being seen. Helen was shy at first, but when she saw other children playing, laughing, just being kids, she started to loosen up. Robert watched from a distance, talking with other adults involved in the project. One of the women, named Frances, who had sponsored a 10-year-old boy, approached Robert and said, "You have no idea how much this means. My husband and I can't have children. We tried for years, went through treatments, nothing worked. We were feeling empty, without purpose. When we heard about the project, we decided to try. And we met John. He had been through so many bad things, was so distrustful of adults. But slowly, he started opening up. Today he calls me Aunt Frances, and when he smiles, when he tells me something that happened at school, I feel like my life has meaning." Robert smiled, moved. That's exactly it. It's not about saving anyone. It's about sharing life. It's about recognizing that we all need each other. That night, when they returned home, Helen was tired but happy. In the car, she looked at Robert and asked, "Are all those kids going to have what I have? Are they going to have a home food, people who take care of them?" Robert nodded. "They will, each in their own way, in their own time, but they will. Because no one deserves to be alone, Helen. No one deserves to be invisible." Helen was thoughtful for a moment. Then she said, her voice soft, "I was invisible, wasn't I? When I lived on the street, people would walk past me and pretend I didn't exist." "That's true," Robert replied, feeling his throat tighten. "But you never stopped existing. You were always important, always valuable. You just needed someone to stop and really look." Helen snuggled into her seat, hugging the school backpack that was now filled with notebooks and books instead of crumbs and empty bottles. "And I'm lucky you looked." Robert had to blink several times to hold back tears. "The luck is all mine, Helen, all mine." The years went by and life ran its course. Helen grew, matured, blossomed. She still had difficult days, moments when the ghosts of the past returned to haunt her. But now she had the structure to deal with it. She had therapy, she had support, she had people who loved her. At 10, she was reading books on her own, getting good grades in school, participating in school plays, and had even started taking guitar lessons. Robert, now in his 60s, discovered that being a father later in life had its advantages. He had patience he wouldn't have had at 30. He had the accumulated wisdom of decades of life. He had the resources to offer opportunities that most children don't have. But most importantly, he had time. Because after meeting Helen, after understanding what really mattered, he had reorganized his life. He still ran the company, but now he delegated more, trusted his team, didn't need to control every detail. One Sunday afternoon, they were both at the park, the same park where Helen had sung Happy Birthday to herself years before. Only now, she wasn't alone. She was running with Isabella and other friends from school, laughing loudly, not afraid of being seen, not afraid of being shooed away. Robert was sitting on a bench watching when Sylvia appeared. She still kept up with the case even after so much time, because she had formed a true bond with that family. She sat next to Robert, and they both sat there in comfortable silence just watching Helen play. After a few minutes, Sylvia said, "You know you transformed her life, right?" Robert shook his head. "She transformed mine, too. I was living on autopilot. Wake up, work, sleep. All without meaning, without color. Helen brought life into my home. She brought purpose to my existence." Sylvia smiled. "You saved each other then." Robert agreed. "I think so. I think that's exactly what happened." At that moment, Helen came running towards them, breathless, her cheeks flushed from running. She sat on Robert's lap, even though she was already too big for it, and announced, "You know what we were talking about? That when I grow up, I want to help kids. I want to work at a place like that project named after me. I want other kids to have the chance I had." Robert hugged her tightly, his heart overflowing. "You will, Helen. You'll achieve anything you want, because you are strong, smart, and you have a huge heart." Helen smiled and ran back to play with her friends. Robert and Sylvia remained there watching, knowing they were witnessing something rare and precious, the rebirth of a life that had seemed condemned, the transformation of pain into hope, the proof that a single act of humanity can change destinies. When the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Robert called Helen. It was time to go home. On the way, she held his hand and said with the simplicity only children have, "My favorite place in the world is with you, you know?" Robert stopped, crouched in front of her, and replied, his voice choked with emotion, "Mine is with you too, daughter, mine too." And in that word, daughter, was everything. It was all the love he never knew he was capable of feeling. It was the entire transformation that an invisible girl had brought about in the life of a man who had everything and yet nothing. It was the proof that family is not just blood, but a choice. It is care. It is presence. It is a love built day after day. When they got home that night, Helen went straight to her room to do her homework. Robert stayed in the living room, looking at the photos that now decorated the walls. Photos of Helen on her first day of school. Photos of birthdays celebrated with a real cake and many friends. Photos of trips to the park, of vacations they took together, of simple but precious moments. And in the center of them all, the first photo they ever took together. Helen, still small, still with that frightened look, holding the cake Robert had brought to the abandoned lot. That photo was ground zero. The moment everything changed. And Robert knew he would keep that image forever, not just in a frame but in his heart, because it was the reminder that when we choose to see those the world insists on making invisible, when we choose to extend a hand instead of looking away, miracles can happen. Small, everyday miracles, but ones that transform lives completely. Helen had just turned 15 when what Robert feared most almost happened. It was a normal Thursday afternoon. Helen was walking home from school with Isabella, laughing at some inside joke that only teenagers understand, when a car pulled up on the sidewalk next to them. A man got out, thin, with an unshaven beard and nervous eyes. Helen felt her blood run cold even before she fully recognized him. But the body doesn't forget. The body holds memories the mind tries to erase. It was him. The man who had hurt her when she was little. The man the protective order was supposed to keep away from her forever. Isabella knew instantly that something was wrong. Helen had turned pale, she was shaking. The man took a few steps toward them and spoke in a harsh voice, trying to sound casual but failing miserably. "Helen? Is that really you?" Wow, you've grown. We need to talk. No, was all Helen could manage to say. Her voice came out weak, trembling, but she forced herself to continue. You can't be here. There's a court order. If you come near me, you'll be arrested. The man laughed, but it was a joyless, tense laugh. Oh, that. Look, I just want to talk. Just a few minutes. You're not going to deny me that after all this time, are you? After all, I was kind of like family to you. Isabella, with a courage she didn't know she had, pulled out her phone and shouted, I'm calling the police right now. Get out of here. The man, hesitated, looked around, saw that a few people on the street were starting to pay attention. He took another step as if to insist, but Helen gathered all her strength and screamed, in a voice that echoed down the entire street, Get out of here! You have no right to me. You never did. It was enough. The man backed away, got in his car and sped off. Helen collapsed, her legs gave out, and she fell to her knees on the sidewalk. Isabella supported her, immediately calling Robert while trying to calm her friend who was shaking like a leaf in the wind. In less than 10 minutes Robert was there, having left an important meeting without a second thought. When he saw Helen like that, he felt a mixture of anger, fear, and a fierce desire to protect. He took her home, called Sylvia, called the psychologist, contacted the lawyer and filed a police report. The police were already looking for the man who had violated the protective order and would now face serious legal consequences. But Robert knew the most severe consequence wasn't legal. It was emotional. Helen had worked so hard to overcome her traumas, to build a new life, and in an instant, with just one appearance from that man, everything seemed to be crumbling. That night, Helen couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, hugging her knees, staring into space. Robert entered her room around 3 in the morning, sat beside her and stayed there in silence. After long minutes, Helen spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. I thought I was over it. I thought he didn't have power over me anymore. But when I saw him, I went back to being that scared 5-year-old. Robert took her hand and squeezed it tightly. You're not that child anymore, Helen. You've grown, you've become strong. The fear you felt today is normal, it's human, but it doesn't define who you are now. But what if he comes back? What if he doesn't give up? Robert took a deep breath. He's going to be arrested. The justice system will do what needs to be done this time. But even if it takes time, even if he tries again, you are not alone. You will never be alone again. I'm here. Sylvia is here. Isabella is here. You have a whole network of people who love you and will protect you. Helen rested her head on Robert's shoulder and cried. She cried out everything she had been holding in. She cried for the child she had been, for the pain she had carried, for the fear that had returned. And Robert stayed there, firm as a rock, until the crying turned to sobs, the sobs to deep breaths and the breaths to sleep. Only then did he get up, cover her with the blanket, and leave the room. The following days were difficult. Helen missed school, became quieter, more withdrawn. The psychologist increased their sessions. Sylvia visited every day, and Robert rearranged his entire schedule to be present as much as possible, because he knew this was a crucial moment. Helen was at a crossroads between letting the past win or gathering the strength to keep moving forward. It was Isabella who gave her the push she needed. One afternoon, she showed up at Helen's house with a backpack full of treats, bad romantic comedies, and a determination to make her friend laugh. We are not going to let that horrible man ruin your life, she declared with the firmness of someone who had decided to take control. He doesn't deserve that power over you. So today, you and I are going to watch terrible movies, eat junk food, and remember everything that's good in your life. Helen tried to resist, but Isabella was persistent, and slowly, very slowly, Helen allowed herself to relax. They laughed at silly jokes, commented on the actors, ate popcorn until they couldn't anymore. And when the night was over, Helen realized she had gone hours without thinking about that man. She realized she was still capable of laughing, of feeling light, of living. The man was arrested a week later. The police found him trying to leave the city. When Robert received the call informing him of the arrest, he felt such a wave of relief that he had to sit down. He told Helen carefully, without celebrating excessively, because he knew it didn't erase the pain, but it was an important step. Helen listened in silence, then nodded and said, "Thank you for everything, for never giving up on me." Robert hugged her and replied, "I will never give up. Never." With time, Helen recovered from that shock. She went back to school, resumed her guitar lessons, started smiling more, frequently, and more importantly, she understood something fundamental. Traumas don't disappear completely, but they lose their power to control you when you find strength within yourself and support around you. When Helen turned 18, Robert threw a party. Nothing extravagant, just the people who truly mattered. Isabella was there, of course, along with other friends from school. Sylvia was there, having become practically family. Julia, the manager of the Tuscan villa, who had become a personal friend, was there. August and his wife were there. Dr. Marcia, the psychologist who had been with Helen for so many years, was there. And there were also some of the children from the Helen Project, who had formed bonds over the years. The party was at a simple steakhouse, with live music, a big cake, and lots of conversation. But the most special moment was when Robert asked for everyone's attention and made a toast. He raised his glass and said, his voice thick with emotion, 13 years ago, I met a small, hungry, frightened girl who was begging for leftovers in an alley. That day, I thought I was going to help someone. But the truth is, I was the one who was saved. Helen gave me a purpose I didn't have. She taught me what it means to truly love. She showed me that family isn't blood. It's the daily choice to be present, to care, to believe in someone even when they don't believe in themselves. He paused, looked at Helen, whose eyes were misty, and continued, Today you turn 18. You're officially an adult. But I want you to know that this home, this space, this love, none of it has an expiration date. You will always have a place here. You will always have a father who loves you more than anything in the world. And you will always have a family that will be by your side no matter what. Helen stood up, went to Robert, and hugged him tightly. She whispered in his ear, just for him to hear, You gave me everything. You gave me food when I was hungry. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to sleep. You gave me love when I thought I didn't deserve to be loved. And you gave me a future when I thought I only had a past. Robert held her even tighter, not caring that. Everyone was watching, not caring about the tears streaming down his face. Because that moment was worth all the meetings he had cancelled, all the deals he had passed up, all the hours he had invested in being a father instead of just a businessman. After the party, late at night, Robert and Helen were sitting on the apartment balcony, looking at the illuminated city below. Helen had just been accepted into college to study psychology. She wanted to work with vulnerable children, to give back to the world a little of what she had received, and Robert couldn't have been prouder. You know what I think about, Helen said, breaking the silence. If you hadn't looked at me that night, if you had been like all the other people who walked past and pretended I was invisible, where would I be today? Robert was thoughtful. I don't know, Helen. Maybe you would have found help somewhere else. Maybe someone else would have stopped to look. Or maybe not. But what I know for sure is that my life without you would be infinitely emptier. Helen smiled. Do you think it was fate? Us meeting like that? Robert shook his head. I don't know if I believe in fate, but I believe in choices. That night I chose not to look away. I chose to follow you. I chose to care. And every day since, I've chosen again. I choose to be your father. I choose to love you. I choose to be present. It's the best choice anyone has ever made for me, Helen said, her voice choked with emotion. It was the best choice I ever made for myself, too. They sat there for a while longer, in comfortable silence, just enjoying each other's presence, and Helen thought, about her entire journey. She thought about the child she had been, singing Happy Birthday alone in a park. She thought about the scared teenager who was almost caught by her past. And she thought about the woman she was becoming, strong, determined, full of dreams and possibilities. A few months later, Helen began volunteering at the project that bore her name. 3 times a week, after her college classes, she would go to the community center and spend time with the children being served. She played with them, listened to their stories, offered a shoulder to cry on when they needed it. And in each of those children she saw a piece of herself. She saw the pain, the fear, but she also saw the hope, the resilience, the incredible capacity children have to rebuild themselves when they find love and structure. There was one girl in particular named Louisa who deeply touched Helen's heart. She was 7, with curly hair and a suspicious gaze of someone who had learned not to expect anything good from adults. She had been found living under an overpass in almost the same situation as Helen years before. When Helen saw her for the first time, she felt as if she were looking into a mirror of her past. She approached slowly, sat on the floor next to Louisa, and didn't try to force a conversation. She just sat there, present, available. After a few minutes, Louisa asked in a small voice, "Did you used to live on the street too?" Helen nodded. "I did, when I was about your age." "And what happened?" "Someone looked at me. Someone decided I mattered, and they gave me a chance to start over." Louisa was thoughtful. "Do you think I can have a chance too?" Helen took the girl's small hand and squeezed it gently. "I'm sure of it. And you know what? You're not alone in this. There are a lot of people here who want to help you, including me." It was the beginning of a special connection. Helen began to follow Louisa's case more closely, working with the project's team. And months later, when Louisa was taken in by a family who fell in love with her, Helen was there, crying with joy, knowing that another life was being transformed. Robert watched all of this with a pride that couldn't be contained. He saw Helen becoming the incredible woman he always knew she would be. He saw the cycle completing itself, the girl who was saved now saving others. And he finally understood the true meaning of legacy. It wasn't about leaving money. It wasn't about leaving companies. It was about leaving multiplied love, about planting seeds of hope that would continue to sprout long after he was gone. One evening, with Helen in college, doing an internship and thinking about her future, Robert had an important conversation with her. He asked her to sit in the living room and said, in a serious voice, "I need to talk to you about something." Helen grew worried. "Did something happen?" "No, nothing bad." Robert smiled to calm her. "It's about legal documents. You've been an adult for a while now, and I would like to make something official that is already real in our hearts. I want to formally adopt you. I want you to be my daughter not just in practice, but on paper as well." Helen was speechless for a few seconds. Then the tears began to fall. "But I'm already your daughter. I have been for a long time." "I know," Robert replied, also emotional. "But I want it to be official. I want your last name to be Mendez. I want you to be legally, juridically, without a shadow of a doubt, recognized as my daughter. If you want to, of course." Helen didn't need to think. She threw herself into Robert's arms and replied between sobs, "I do. I want to very much." The process was quick. At 18, Helen could decide for herself about the adoption, and a few months later, in a simple ceremony at the courthouse with Sylvia, August, Isabella, and other loved ones as witnesses, Helen officially became Helen Smith Mendez. When they left the courthouse with the documents in hand, she looked at the updated birth certificate and smiled. There it was written, "Father, Robert Mendez." It was just paper, but it was also so much more. It was the formal recognition of a love that had begun in a dirty alley, among garbage bags and desperation, and had transformed into the most beautiful and true thing they had both ever experienced. Years passed. Helen graduated from psychology with honors and began working at an institution that cared for homeless children. Robert, now in his 70s, began to slow down at work, passing the command of the company to trusted people and dedicating more time to the Helen Project, which now served hundreds of children and had become a national reference in child protection and care. One Saturday afternoon they went to that park together, the same one where Helen had sung Happy Birthday alone so many years before. They sat on the same bench, watched the children playing, and just enjoyed the moment. Helen was now 25, dating a young man she had met in college, thinking about getting her master's degree, full of plans and dreams. "Do you remember when you sang Happy Birthday here alone?" Robert asked. Helen nodded. "How could I forget? It was one of the worst nights of my life. But it was also important, because it was right before you showed up." Robert was silent for a moment, then he asked, "If you could go back in time and change everything, change what you went through, erase the pain, would you?" Helen thought long and hard before answering. It was a difficult question. Finally, she said, "I don't know. The bad things I went through hurt me a lot. They left scars I still carry. But they also made me who I am. They gave me empathy, they gave me purpose, they made me understand the pain of others in a way I might not have if I'd had a normal childhood. So maybe I wouldn't change it. But I would definitely choose for other children not to have to go through what I went through." Robert smiled. "That's why you're so special. You transformed pain into purpose." "I learned from the best," Helen replied, resting her head on his shoulder. They stayed there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in warm colors, and when they stood up to leave, they walked hand in hand, father and daughter, united by a story that began with a look that chose not to turn away, with a choice to see someone who was invisible, with a gesture of humanity in a world that so often forgets to be human. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Helen and Robert has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of transformation, of how a single gesture of compassion can change destinies, click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most in this story. Was it Helen's courage to keep believing? Was it Robert's determination not to look away? Or was it the proof that family is built with love, presence, and daily choices? Every day we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which remind us of the importance of seeing those the world insists on making invisible. Because in the end, we all have the power to change a life. We just have to choose to look, choose to care, choose to act. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode with another story that will stir your emotions and make you reflect on what truly matters in life. Until next time.